The Straight Red Card is sponsored by Roughneck Scarves. Visit Roughneck Scarves for your supporters' gear from Seattle, Portland, New York, to the Philadelphia Union, and anything MLS to the English Premier League. Visit Roughneck Scarves at roughneckscarves.com. Welcome to the Straight Red Card. Today, we want to welcome to the show longtime youth soccer coach, not that long, I don't want to make you sound real old, Charles, but Coach Charles Dailey to the show. How are things in North Carolina, Charles?
It's a beautiful day in North Carolina, and I'm looking forward to the summer. It's right around the corner.
Yeah, and it's already looking a lot better weather-wise. It's good to be done with the winter. That problem there in NC, yeah.
We've had a few tornadoes, but things seem to have settled down, and, you know, it's that time of year, but it's been unusual here maybe the past 2 weeks.
Now, we have to give the people who may not know who you are, Charles, some sort of context because you've been a youth coach for a number of years at both the high school and the college level, and you actually, as the story goes, and it's not a story, it's what really happened, you were Jurgen Sommer's youth coach, and you actually called up legendary coach Jerry Yeagley here at Indiana University and got Juergen a tryout there at IU. Now, how did that all happen?
I happened to coach Juergen in Naples, Florida, when he was in the 7th and 8th grade. He was a great player. He actually played forward for us, and he went away to private school at Culver Academy. He was a goalkeeper there, and he would come home in the summer to Naples and would throw him in with the players from Naples, and he played in goal as time went by. And I saw that he, had a chance to be a great player. And Coach Yeagley apparently had heard about him while he was at Culver, which was a real small private school type thing, and he wasn't sure he would fit in. And I had met at one of the licensing courses a player who was a coach who played for Coach Yeagley at Indiana University, and I said, well, I'll just give him a shout and see what his thoughts were. And probably, about a month before the season started, the preseason, I called Jerry up and I said, we've got this kid here and I actually think he could help you. And Coach Yeagley, of course, was great. He was renowned for trying out players. Armando Betancourt was a player who some people from Alabama called and suggested he give a tryout too, and of course he became a great All-American. Anyway, Juergen showed up. He walked on and made the team. The number one goalkeeper got hurt. Juergen went in, and the poor kid couldn't get his job back. So,
well,
the Luke Carrick, Wally Pipp story, I guess.
And I've got to ask, because, I'm used to seeing maybe like strikers be moved to center backs or, strikers move to central mids or something like that. But a striker, that late in his career, a striker moved to goalkeeper.
Yeah, it does seem odd.
It seems a bit odd of a switch.
Yeah. We had a very good goalkeeper. He actually played for the University of South Florida. His name was Richey. And we needed, Juergen was someone, he probably could have, played at a lot of Division I schools in the field. He was very talented. And anyway, we just needed him at center forward, and he was a big target player up there and did a good job. But once you saw him in goal, that you could see that he was going to be a great player. And it surprised me. It was no surprise that he went to Indiana University, but it was a bit of a surprise for everyone that he was as successful as he did from there.
Now, my question is, Charles, how did Juergen get a name like Juergen, a New York City kid, And did when he went to QPR, did they just think he was German?
Well, Jurgen's parents were first-generation German, and actually they both probably deserve, 95% of the credit for his soccer background and training. His father was a semi-professional from Hamburg and a great player in his own right. We played on a club team together.
Unfortunately for Juergen, of course, he had Brad Friedel and Casey Keller in front of him.
Yeah.
Although, and those were two great goalkeepers. I'm not sure how Tony Meola got in front of him, but that's a whole nother story, and probably I'll reserve my opinion there. But you got to throughout your coaching career, you started off, I guess, at the high school level and then moved up to the college level. How come you didn't, keep moving up maybe and stick with it?
Well, coaching is very difficult to break into, and sometimes it just is the luck of the draw. And I applied for a couple of jobs when I was after my third year at UNC-Greensboro, and it just didn't work out. And I needed, to do something, so I started doing something else, and it worked out very well, and I probably ended up maybe making more money than I would have, made coaching. But, I regretted maybe not making a difference in, young people's lives. I really enjoyed that aspect of coaching.
It's a little more lucrative now than it was back in the 80s and the 90s. I mean,
absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely.
And that does make a difference in it, and that's where the good coaches hopefully will stay on, whereas back then, it was difficult to be a high school coach. You were only making basically high school, coach money, and that's difficult. Go ahead, Brett. I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say, to be fair, even here in Indy, a lot of high school coaches still make pennies.
Yeah.
They have to be. I mean, most of them have to be, teachers
right.
at some level, and then they also coach, and they make, like I said, they make pennies on top of what they do as a teacher. So
now you did have 6 other different players who eventually went pro that you coached. Can you tell us a little about a few of those guys?
Well, there was a team that started in Greensboro, and I'm not counting a lot of the players from UNC-Greensboro played on it, but several of them played on an under-19 team that I coached that was very successful, and they were looking for players initially. There were a couple in Florida who played indoors. Again, that was the only thing going on back in the early 90s, late 80s.
Yeah.
And it's just something where you coach enough kids and they enjoy the game enough, they want to stay with it, and, things just click and it works out. But, coach some great kids along the way, great players, and, great people.
Yeah. And then, today, of course, Brett and I were talking about this before, all these high school kids, they have these local development academy showcases where they can kind of show off to the colleges that are interested, where the colleges will send out scouts and look for these good players. I'm sure it's still a minority of the players are found that way. But in the 80s, when you were with UNC-Greensboro, I mean, how did you guys go out and find quality players to play on the team?
It was a lot more difficult back then to project a kid onto the college level. And the basic way that people did it back then, and there were a few variations of this, is you would recruit in certain areas. And there would be kids that had made it on the college level, and you would go back there and talk to people, watch the player, and compare him to people who had proven themselves successful on the college level. And typically even back then it was more hit and miss, but the coaches knew who the good players were even then. It was just a matter of getting them to go to your school.
Right.
And every now and then you could unearth someone who would be a great player.
And there wasn't a whole lot of money to throw around as far as scholarships go either. So you kind of almost had to talk a lot of those kids just into coming to the college because they get to play soccer, but they still had to pay to go to the school.
Quite frankly, that's still the same issue.
Yeah.
For most colleges.
I think, most people realize this, but I think like the major college scholarships now, they're about 9 for the men and maybe as many as 14 for the women. It's much more likely that a girl get an opportunity to play college soccer than a guy in terms of the scholarship situation.
Yeah. Now, back then as well, there were always these specific high schools that always had great teams. I think about Kentucky. I think about Ballard High School, who beat us in the state finals. And then, you had high schools in New Jersey and California you could pretty much count on to have a few great players. Is that kind of also how you guys did? Did you scout teams that you knew generally produce great players?
Absolutely. And it goes back to the high school coach many times. The coach is the core of the program. He's the thing that, is there year after year. He's the bottom line. And typically, great coaches will have great players ongoingly. And that's certainly another factor with, high schools that are successful.
Right. Now, still, even today, a majority of high school players, they're not going to be recruited by any major college or any known college for that part. But, I mean, you wrote an article which, offered some recommendations, and this was in the Soccer Journal, about how players coming out of high school can find the right college for themselves. I'm not sure how long ago you wrote that article, but do your recommendations still hold true today? And if not, what would you change about them?
Well, they still hold fairly true. I think the key is to start contacting colleges in the player's junior year and, just send them a letter. These are my accomplishments. This is my team, and I'm interested in your school. If the coach is interested, typically he'll have a year to go watch the player play. And, of course, now kids are much more known by their reputation, or they have a lot more opportunities for exposure to colleges than they did in the 80s.
Yeah.
The internet and the media has helped out a lot on that.
Absolutely. It's a different world in many ways. Back when Jurgen, for example, was looking for a school, it was practically the Wild West. I met the coach.
Yeah, I remember the 80s really well, and we had one of the top teams in our state, and nobody was knocking on our doors. So you're absolutely right. And Brett, at least you had somebody knock on your door and say, hey, if you're interested in becoming or moving on to the next level, then you better get hopping, because there are things you need to do to make that happen. To you, Charles, I mean, how many gems in the rough are we missing out on in this current system the way it's set up now? I mean, still.
Is colleges typically don't have a lot of money to send a coach recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like he can send his assistants out. They still don't have very much money in the recruiting budget. But as far as missing players, my own thought is that it probably was a lot easier to miss players back in the early and 90s. It's gotten a lot more difficult. If someone's out there, he typically would be, have some people would know who he was, is what I want to say.
Right.
The players that probably get missed are maybe, and I want to, say first-generation Americans in the inner city, like, some of the big cities.
Right.
Or potentially, Latino kids in Florida or, Texas, something like that, whose parents, whose dad maybe played soccer or they grew up playing soccer.